In our sermon today, I want us to think about and imagine what it would be like in Jesus' day, in Jesus' culture at that time, to be a leper. Now, if you were a leper, you were separated from your family. You were separated from society. If you were a leper, you had to walk around, and this is not the best picture, but you had to walk around with your hair disheveled. You had to walk around with tattered clothing. You had to walk around with your mouth covered. Partly, this is to help people understand that you've got leprosy and you're contagious, stay away from me. Partly, this is also because that was what people who were mourning a death in that culture, that's how they would appear. Because if you had leprosy, you were mourning a death, and it was your own death. You were considered the walking dead, alive but dead. Now, that's not really the worst part. The worst part is really the spiritual aspect. Rabbis taught in that day that if you had leprosy, it was a great punishment from God for a great sin that you had committed. So can you imagine the guilt and the shame? Can you imagine being a leper, separated from everybody, being really the worst of the worst? Can you imagine what that would be like? Now, we're talking about leprosy to start the sermon, not just because there's some lepers in a story we're going to go over, but also I am thoroughly convinced that we have leprosy here today. Not Hansen's disease, but spiritual form of leprosy. A sin that can overtake Christians, men and women alike, that can lead them to feel hopeless, that can lead them to have shame and guilt, that can lead them to feel like they have nowhere to go. And today we're talking about pornography. And I'm very convinced that pornography is our spiritual leprosy of our time. It's a serious sin. I want to start out with just a few statistics. There is a Barna Institute who does research. They went and did a study in 2015 of over 2,000 Americans. And some of the research that they found is that people that access pornography at least once a month, 79% of these people surveyed, of men ages 18 to 30, which is about half of them, or about 1,000 people that age, 79% access pornography at least once a month. That's 4 out of 5 people, basically, of that age. As you get older, 67% they found of men ages 31 to 49 access pornography once a month. Now, the statistics also are broken down. They broke them down between Christian and non-Christian. All right. So total amount of people that consider themselves non-Christian in this survey, 65% of non-Christian men access pornography at least once a month, 30% of non-Christian women. Now, next are going to be the Christian men and Christian women statistics. What do you think it is for Christians? Same? 64% of Christian men, 15% of Christian women. That's over 2/3. Statistically speaking, looking around our room today, there are people that are struggling with pornography. And this is a sin that is hard to talk about. This is a sin that there's a lot of shame and guilt involved, yet there's so many people struggling with it. And so we need to have a conversation about that as a church family. It's a serious thing. Now, intentionally, the women, they're out at the women's retreat. We have some women here today. Pornography, does affect women, but you can see men are the most affected by that. So this is one of the reasons we're talking about that as well. Now, in this study, 39% of the Christian men, of the ones that said that they accessed it at least once a month, said that their usage is excessive. So we have a lot going on here. So this, to me, is spiritual leprosy of our day. This, to me, is the most serious sin that's affecting our church. And I know that's saying a lot, but I mean that, and I believe that 100%. This is a serious problem that we're having. And so today, we're continuing our journey in Luke. And what we find is that Jesus, if you want to turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 17, verse 11, is that Jesus, he is intentionally going out of his way to meet some people, to minister to some people that absolutely 100% need him. And that Jesus is going out of his way to go find people who are full of shame, full of guilt, who have no hope, and that we find anybody struggling with pornography, that this is the same Jesus that we encounter in our scripture today, that he's intentionally seeking out those that have lost hope, that feel shame, that don't know what to do about it. So we're going to pick it up in Luke chapter 17, verse 11. It says, while he was on the way to Jerusalem, he was passing between Samaria and Galilee. Now, something we just want to look at real quick is a map of the area that this story is taking place in. Jesus has been basically in Galilee his entire life. He's been ministering there, he's been preaching there, he's been teaching there, he's been healing there, and now he's headed to Jerusalem to die. He's going to the cross. Normally what would happen if a Jewish person was going from Galilee to Jerusalem, you can see there's Samaria right there, they would avoid going through Samaria. And so they would take this route through Decapolis, through Perea, into Judea. So they would circumvent Samaria, they'd go around it. But here what we find is that Jesus is intentionally going into Samaria. And the reason why is that he is intentionally seeking these people that he's about to come to in Samaria, people that need him the most. Verse 12. As he entered a village, 10 leprous men who stood at a distance met him, and they raised their voices, saying, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. Now, the thing that we have to understand that's very similar between leprosy and our spiritual leprosy of pornography. When you're infected by a microbacterium with leprosy, and when you're infected with this, it doesn't just spring up suddenly overnight. The incubation period starts, on average, ends around 5 years when you get your first symptoms and you're really like starting to lose your skin and have scales and things like that. Sometimes the incubation period takes 20 years for leprosy. And here how this, in my opinion, is similar to pornography, because sometimes your pornography, it starts small. It starts innocently. It starts with inquisitiveness. It starts with somebody exposing you to it. It starts, you're not even trying to look for it. But what happens is there's an incubation period where you keep on going after it and keep on going after it, and suddenly the desire for it can grow and can grow and can grow. And just like the incubation period with leprosy, suddenly you've got this leprosy, now you've got this full-blown addiction to pornography, and it started somewhere. It started small. In these studies of this Barna study about pornography, it talked about age of first exposure to pornography. The average age of first exposure is 11 years old. We live in a messed up society, everybody. And listen, it's not getting any better. I guarantee the average age is going to get younger and younger and younger. By the time you're age 14, the statistics show that 94% have been exposed to pornography. I'm just going to say, parents, if you're giving your child a phone and you're not using some monitoring and you're not taking it from them at night and you're not making sure you're keeping track of what they're doing on that, basically what you're doing is you're handing them a gateway to pornography. The way that Satan has everything set up, your child might not even be looking for pornography, but pornography will find them. And so I want to encourage any parents, if you've given your child a phone, take that phone up until you have monitoring software. Don't ever let them have it in a place at night, in their bedroom, whatever. Make sure you always know what's on that phone. Now, here's the startling thing as well. When you're young, you don't realize what you're getting into. Here are some attitudes from some of these surveys of people, and it's maybe a little bit hard to see. I stole this infographic from Barna. That's why it looks nice. But we can see out of this survey, out of about 1,000 people who are young adults or teenagers, they said, okay, what do you think is wrong? What's immoral here? And they gave them some choices, okay? So the 88% of them agreed that taking something that belongs to someone else, that's immoral, right? I want you to look down here at the very bottom. It says viewing pornographic images. Only 32% of teenagers and young adults thought that it was immoral, thought that it was wrong. This is below not recycling. They think that not recycling is worse than looking at pornography. We live in an age where pornography is part of the culture. And young people, if you are dabbling in pornography and you may not think it's wrong, I'm telling you what you're dabbling with is dangerous. It's a sin and it can overtake you. It's nothing to play with. Nothing to play with at all. And if you're using pornography, even if it's just once in a great while, you need to stop before it gets out of hand, because it will get out of hand. And if you need help stopping, you can always talk to your pastor. But also, that's what the rest of this sermon is about. There is victory if you find yourself on this path already, no matter what age you're at, no matter how long you struggled with pornography, there is victory over pornography in Jesus. So we want to take a look at what these lepers have said to Jesus. They see Jesus. There's something about him. They know that he can help them. And so they say, Master, have mercy on us. You see, they've come to a point in their lives that this leprosy has taken over and they have no control at all. Their lives are unmanageable. They can't do anything about it. And now they see somebody that can. They are not the master, and they realize that Jesus is the master, and he can do something about it in the same way with our spiritual leprosy, with pornography. Sometimes it can become out of hand. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. You could destroy your marriage. You can lose your job. You can XYZ. And it doesn't matter what the consequences, and as hard as you try to stop, you just can't seem to stop. It has mastered you. And the reason is, well, let's take a look at what it says in the Bible in Ephesians 6:12. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. Does that scare anybody at all? This is a reality check. Pornography isn't something that's just physical. This is a spiritual battle going on. This is Satan trying to infect us with sin, trying to help us, our relationship with God, to be destroyed. So in our own strength, there is absolutely no way that we can beat this, because Satan is stronger. He is wiser than us. And so the first thing that we need to do is we just need to concede that we have no power over this, but that Jesus does. Jesus is the master, not us. It's not going to be fought in our own strength. It's not going to be fought in white-knuckling it, making promise after promise after promise that I'm not going to do this again, stepping back and saying, no, this has overtaken me. Jesus, I need to leave myself to you and to your strength. Now, we look at this, concede you have no power over this. Let's just define what this is that we're actually talking about. There's a verse in Proverbs 27:20. It says, hell and destruction are never full. So the eyes of man are never what? Satisfied. Now when we think of hell, of course we believe in the scriptures where hell isn't a place where you go and you live and you're tortured. Hell is a consuming fire that annihilates us if we choose that path, if we choose not to follow Jesus. And the hell fires, when you feed hell fires, do they go out? No, they don't go out at all. They keep on burning. And so the whole picture is a fire that never stops burning. No matter how much you feed it and feed it and feed it, it's never satisfied. It never goes out. And this is what's being described here, looking for satisfaction with your eyes, looking for this to fill a deep longing with your eyes, whether it's pornography, whether it is buying clothing, whether it is making tons of money, whatever it is, it never will satisfy. It's empty. So the eyes of man can never be satisfied. And see, what we're talking about here, pornography is a surface issue. The issue that's really underneath all of this is lust, what was just described. The problem is with lust. Now, let's define lust. This is my own definition. It's hard to define lust, but this is the best we could come up with it to make sense. The process or mindset of trying to find ultimate satisfaction in anything that wasn't created to bring ultimate satisfaction. See, all of us have a deep longing, all of us have a desire, and if this deep longing isn't being met, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, we're going to try to meet that deep longing with something. Some of it is food sometimes, and we try to get that satisfaction out of food, and we eat the food, and we overeat the food, and then afterwards we're not satisfied, we're stuffed full, and we wish we wouldn't have done that. Some of us, go after a career, and you work and you work and you work, and at the end it's just like, why did I work so much? That wasn't satisfying. Some go after pornography to fill this void, though. And you go to pornography, and you use pornography, and at the time, in the moment, it feels good, but afterwards it's empty. And we can get stuck in a cycle of what's called the cycle of addiction or cycle of sin and forgiveness, where you're needing something satisfying, and so you go to pornography, it doesn't satisfy, you feel terrible, so guess what? You're going to try to go back to pornography again, and you get stuck in a cycle. So when we're defining what we realize, what we're powerless against, we're just conceding that we have no power over lust, but that Jesus does. Now, let's take a look at what the lepers said to Jesus. Not just master, but they said, Master, have what on us? Have mercy. Or what was your version? Pity. Now, this word is one of the most important words in our Bible, because this word, it tries to encapsulate who God is, the essence of God is, with one word, which is almost totally impossible, right? So this Greek word is akin to a Hebrew word in the Old Testament. You've probably seen it before. Ever read loving kindness, mercy, steadfast love, faithfulness? They made up a word, loving kindness, to try to encapsulate in one word in Hebrew the essence of who God is. And it just doesn't translate over well to English. And so these are all the different words they've tried to use. In fact, I've put my own word up here. Merciful, loving kindness, faithfulness, steadfast love. These men, what they're doing, these lepers, they don't have any power. They need Jesus to be their master. They're going after, and they see who he is, and they're going after the character of God. They're calling on the character of God. God, have mercy on us according to your merciful, loving kindness, faithful, steadfast love. It's like the verse in Lamentations 3:22 through 23. The steadfast love, that's this word, of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And the reason why we have to understand this, maybe you've struggled with pornography last night, or maybe it was this morning, even before coming to church. But we can always have forgiveness. We can always go to God because of who he is. His faithfulness is always there, and his mercies are new every morning. Now, speaking of his faithfulness and his steadfast love, it's not just the fact that we can receive forgiveness. This verse here in 1 Corinthians 10:13, as Paul says, God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. This means not only do we concede we don't have power over lust, we don't just concede that Jesus does, we also concede that Jesus can help us in any moment of temptation to overcome that temptation. That we are not left hopeless, that Jesus is there in that moment, and his strength can live through us, so we don't have to give in to that temptation. And so we concede that we have no power over lust, but that Jesus does and can give you victory. But here's the thing. Let's read here in verse 14 what Jesus does for these lepers. It says, when he saw them, he said to them, go and show yourselves to the priests. And as they were going, they were cleansed. Now, just real quick, they had to go to the priest to have them declared clean so they could re-enter into Israel. There was a whole service for that. But here's the thing. Let me ask you something. These lepers, they're asking Jesus for healing. They're asking him for his mercy. They're asking him to be the master over their lives. What do you think would have happened to them if they would have said, when Jesus is like, go to the temple, go to the priest, what do you think would have happened to them if they're like, nah, I don't want to do that? I don't think we're going to do that, Jesus. I don't feel like doing that. They would not have been healed. See, in this moment, they're giving themselves to Jesus. They're admitting that he's got the strength. They're admitting that they don't. And when Jesus is asking them to do something, they do it because they trust and they believe in him. They've given their will over to the will of Jesus. And that's the choice right there. Are they going to submit to Jesus and be healed, or are they going to do their own thing and continue on down this path that they're on? And it's the same thing with lust and pornography. The issue is, as it says here in James 4:7, submit therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. See, the devil is after tempting us. We get this longing, this desire, this lust. We want to go after pornography to fulfill it. But the thing is, in that moment, we know that Jesus can give us victory, but if we only submit to Jesus and let his power live out through us. In submitting to God, submitting your will, battling with yourself. Well, I love how Steps to Christ put it. It's a real book. She keeps it real in this. The warfare against self is the greatest battle that was ever fought. The yielding of self, surrendering all to the will of God, requires a struggle. But the soul must submit to God before it can be renewed in holiness. And it's in submission to the power of God that we find victory. Because when that temptation comes, Satan's trying to get at you. You don't fight Satan. You say, God, I need you to fight this battle on my behalf. And does God ever lose a battle? No. So therefore, technically, we should never lose a battle either. But it's whether we're submitting to God and letting his power live through us. It's whether we're at home at night and alone in our bed and we've got our phone and the temptation to look at pornography is there. Do you have to give in to that temptation? No. Is there power to overcome that temptation? Yes. Do you need to give your will over to God in that moment and maybe put your phone away? Right? There is a part that we play. God cannot do for us what we can do. He expects us to give our will over to him and act on that as well. Now, when we're looking at this whole idea that we concede that we have no power, that Jesus does and can give us the victory, we submit to God. This submission is hard. It's a battle. It's a struggle. And so the only way that we really can learn how to submit to God in those times is the work that we're going to have to do beforehand, before we're tempted. See, oftentimes when we look at our behaviors and we're trying to stop pornography or we're trying to stop whatever addiction it is, whether it's smoking or drinking or whatever it is, we focus on our behavior and say, I got to stop this behavior. But we know the root of it is lust. And we know that Jesus, the only way to overcome that is submitting to Jesus. But the only way we're going to really learn how to submit to Jesus is if we're spending time building a deep, close, intimate relationship with Jesus. And so the focus beforehand, before the temptation even occurs, is how much time are we actually spending with Jesus? How much time are we actually spending praying about this, asking for victory for it beforehand? How much time are we actually spending in the Word every morning saying, Jesus, give me strength for today to submit to you when this temptation comes? It's our relationship and our intimacy with God that's going to allow us to submit to him in those moments. Because we have to look at something. We talked about lust. And lust is trying to fulfill a craving, trying to be satisfied to the deepest part of who we are. But I love what Psalm 107:9 says. God, what does it say? God satisfies. God satisfies the longing soul. And the hungry soul he fills with good things. See, lust is all about needing something that we don't have. And oftentimes it's because there's something going on between us and God. We don't have a deep relationship with God. We haven't spent that time fostering a relationship with him and having a connection with him and letting him satisfy our deepest desires. And so if we're not doing that, what ends up happening, then we have this lust problem, and then we try to go fulfill it in other ways and fill that lust and that craving in other ways. And so it's God that satisfies. So if you want to look at it, the more that we grow our intimacy with God, the less and less we're going to lust and the less we're going to desire pornography. Conversely, the less we have intimacy with God, the less that we spend time with God, the less that we pray to Him and connect with Him, the more our pornography and lust problem is going to grow and get out of hand. We're not going to want to submit to God in that moment of temptation. Now, there's another thing that we need to talk about with pornography. It's like a three-legged chair, all right? It's a big problem because there's accessibility. We can access pornography so easily. It's not like the old days where you had to go into a gas station and, you were a pervert if you went over to the certain section or whatever, right? It's anonymity. You can be anonymous when you're on there. Nobody knows you're on there, okay? And then there's affordability. It's free. You don't have to pay a thing to look at pornography. And because of these three factors, pornography has just exploded. Satan has set this up so well in our culture. So you can't really do anything about the affordability, right? And you can't really do a whole lot about your accessibility. Unfortunately, again, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I don't know if we could live without the internet. That's where we're at right now. It's crazy. We can do something about being anonymous, though. So let me take away the chair there and just pretend the chair crushes, right, and crumbles or whatever. So this is a part of the solution. So there are some accountability software that you can put on your phone, on your computer. Okay, so there's something called Covenant Eyes, and that actually is a filtering software, and it stops you from going to these sites. But you can get around that too. It's just a part of the solution. Now, something that I think is awesome is this thing called Accountable to You. You can put it on your phone, you can put it on your computer, on your tablet, probably on your TV, I guess, I don't know. And but basically what Accountable to You does is it doesn't block you from going to certain websites, but what it does is if you go to certain websites or put in certain phrases in Google or whatever it is, it texts an accountability partner instantly. You're no longer anonymous. And this is such a helpful tool for anybody struggling with pornography. But here is the hard part. You need an accountability partner. Pornography is so full of shame. It's so hard to open up, especially as men, and I'm speaking to the men here, to reach out and talk to another man about pornography and that you're struggling with pornography. But a part of how we're going to overcome this sin, yes, we need a deep connection with God, but we also are created to be in connection with each other. There's a verse that says, I wish we could get this a little more manly. Perfume and incense bring joy to the heart. Okay, maybe, I don't know, working out and getting big muscles. I don't know, anyways. Football and baseball bring joy to the heart. So does earnest counsel from a man's friend, Proverbs 27:9. We need each other. We're not made to walk through this life alone. Like we saw in children's story, we need friends. And so I'm just going to put this up here for our focus. So when we're trying to overcome this idea of pornography and the underlying sin of lust, the focus needs to be on our relationship and intimacy with God and with other people. Because a part of the lust and the longing and the desire that we have is when we're not connected to other people and we're not connected with God, we're going to try to connect to something else that's not satisfying. So going back to this whole thing, when we're focusing on intimacy with God and others, pornography and lust are going to go down. When we're not doing that, though, this is when we're going to have struggles and problems, and not just with pornography, but with other things we lust after. So I want to put this back up there. And now we're ending this sermon, and you're like, Pastor, we didn't finish the story. That's okay. Read the story yourself. We'll finish it some other time. But here's the thing. If you need an accountability partner, and you're wanting to change, and this is the aspect maybe that's missing for you, I'm going to ask that you come talk to me if you're a man. If you're a woman, you can come talk to my wife. No shame. No shame at all. No judgment from me. And I'm telling you because I used to struggle with this myself. I also know that there is victory in Jesus in this. But it's whether you're willing to walk down this road or not. Are we willing to spend time with God? Are we willing to open up to each other? Are we willing to be supported by each other? And so if you're struggling with this and you want to have victory and you want an accountability partner, come see me and I can help set one up for you. There are plenty of church leaders here that would be more than willing to do that, but I can understand the shame involved and, feeling a certain way. So if you want to talk to me, please, just let's have a conversation. And if you're a woman, please talk to my wife, because it's not appropriate for me to talk to women about this, just to be honest, right? So talk to my wife about that. And so I just want to end today's discussion. Now, obviously, in one sermon, we're not going to have everything that there is to know about pornography, about lust. Some people have gone through trauma, and they seek pornography because of that, and you need counseling. It's okay to go to counseling for it, too. There's a meme going around on social media. It's okay to have Jesus and my therapist, too. I agree with that. It's okay, right? So there's other things sometimes with pornography that are going on. So if you need to seek counseling, don't be afraid. I want to end here with this quote from this book, Prophets and Kings. It says, "Nothing is apparently more helpless, yet really more invincible, than the soul that feels its nothingness and relies what? Wholly on God." If you're struggling with pornography today, if you're struggling with any sin today, let's concede. We don't have the strength. It's okay. And let's learn how to fully be intimate with God and rely on him and get help from others. And so again, I want to invite anybody struggling with it. Please come talk to me, or please come talk to my wife after the service today. So why don't we bow our heads and we'll have a word of prayer. Lord God, you love us so much. And Lord, if there's anybody here, statistically, Lord, we know that there are people in this very room that are struggling with this, with pornography, God, with lust. And Lord, I just want to ask and pray, right? I'm just going to leave it quiet for a moment. And I just want to let anyone who's been struggling with this reach out to you, Lord, and say, Lord, help me with this, Lord. Lord, you've heard the voices. You know them. You love all of us. We're all your children, God. We want to thank you for your mercy. We want to thank you for your strength, Lord. And God, we can overcome this together with your strength. And so, Lord, empower every man here that's struggling with pornography right now with victory, Lord, with faith in you, Lord. Every man and woman, we pray. And be with us the rest of this day and help us to walk with you and each other, we pray in the name of Jesus. Amen.